what I called the civic virtue of private home education. The civic virtue as a civic organization means private people coming together and carrying out the business of civic involvement. We don't need to wait for the government. We don't need to look to the government. We're citizens and we're active and involved, and we should take it on ourselves to make our country better.
This podcast is brought to you by BJU Press Homeschool. Homeschooling is an exciting adventure we take with our children. One of the most challenging parts of this journey is choosing the curriculum you want to use. BJU Press Homeschool is a curriculum you can trust. All the books, resources, and videos have been designed with you and your child in mind. Their curriculum is educationally robust and rich, taking into account that children have different learning styles, strengths, and needs. Mom, you are in charge. BJU Press Homeschool is here to come alongside and support you. Do you need help with the teaching load, or is there a subject you just don't want to teach? Their amazing video courses are available for all grades and almost every subject. BJU Press Homeschool believes that homeschooling can produce a new generation of students who know God, love their neighbors, and stand firm in their faith. For more information, go to bjupresshomeschool.com. That's bjupresshomeschool.com. Hi, welcome to the Zan Tyler podcast. I'm your host, Zan Tyler. This is part 2 of my conversation with Jim Mason, the president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. So if you missed part 1, be sure to go back and listen to it or watch it on YouTube. Without further ado, please enjoy the rest of my conversation with Jim. So, Jim, I love the fact that you are such a great writer. And some of your articles, I quote from when I speak, and they resonate in my head. So one is, so I was looking for this the other day because I wanted to use it and I wanted to make sure I got it right. You said that homeschooling is an island of freedom in a sea of compulsion. Did I get that right? Mm-hmm. Okay. The second one is you call it a love your kids movement. Heidi St. John and I were talking about that yesterday, about how much we love that concept. It just puts homeschooling in such a great light. And then the third one, and this is where I want to park for a minute, your article, the civic virtue of private homeschooling, is, if you're listening, you should go to the HSLDA website and try to find this article. It is one of the best articles I have ever written. So will you take just a minute and tell us about de Tocqueville's visit to America and what he saw and sort of the genesis of private associations in the United States and how important that is?
Yeah. So Alexis de Tocqueville was a Frenchman who toured the United States in the early 19th century and went back and wrote a book, Democracy in America. And one of the most interesting, long-standing, still existing observations that he made was that the culture in America had created the civic involvement of its citizens that was unique in his experience, different from anything he'd seen in Europe. And he talked about how in England, if you wanted to get something done, you had to get a great lord behind it. And in France, if you wanted to get something done, you had to get the government behind it. But in America, people just did it themselves. They didn't wait for anybody. They had a great idea and they talked to their friends and neighbors, and then they'd create what he called associations. And he was just amazed that in America, any task, big or small, that people could conceive of, they'd create an association of private citizens and pursue those ends. And so that's kind of woven into the fabric of the American culture and the American character that we should be careful that we don't lose. Instead of looking to government to solve our problems, we can rely on each other to do a lot of things, and we should.
One of the things you say in this other article I've been reading that you wrote is that one of the things HSLDA does, in addition to helping homeschool moms and dads who are in distress now and protecting, just the individual homeschool mom and dad, which is the basis of everything, but you also support state organizations in their quest to fight for freedom and support homeschooling parents?
Yeah, so I in the article you referred to, I went to one of the leadership conferences that was put on by a state organization where I live here in Virginia, and I was speaking at the conference. But what was most interesting to me at this conference was that Ann Miller, who's the head of HEAB in Virginia, had put on this leadership conference, and here's all these people, 75, 100 people on their weekends devoting their personal time to learning how to run a small homeschool organization better. And they, they're just so vibrant and active and cheerful, and they were leading different kinds of organizations. There's people who focus on providing support for parents. There are people who focus on providing cooperative classes for kids. There's people who focus on creating a sports league, or, if somebody has an interest in beekeeping, they actually, they'll form a homeschool group to advance teaching kids beekeeping and stuff. You name it, they would create it.
Right.
And so this, this culture of private associations finds, it's they're small and they're big. And so in almost every state, there is a state organization that kind of sprung up, a lot of them about the same time that HSLDA was created, with a very local mission to keep homeschooling free in their own states. And they, educate and train and help homeschoolers in their states. And the most, one of the most important things they do from my perspective, from a national perspective, is they keep their pulse on the legislature. They track the legislature. They have relationships with legislators. They,
And those relationships are so important too. The judicial and the legal aspect that y'all take care of is vital, and homeschoolers having relationships within their own state with their own legislators is so important. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but amen to what you were saying.
It's different than what some people think too. It's bigger than what many people think. Some people, you may think that, well, there's a bill that's introduced that is going to create some new barrier to homeschooling, and so that's when they go into action, and that's true, they do. But what they do more importantly, in my view, or as importantly anyway, is, all the time, every year, many states hold special events where families come to the Capitol and go out and meet their representatives, not to ask them for anything, but just to say, hey, I live in your district and I homeschool, and I just want you to know, this is where we are and what we believe in, and give them a little information, meet the kids. Probably the single most effective lobbyist in America is, 10 years old.
Kids, yes, that's right. That's exactly right.
So that's what state organizations and local organizations, they're so important. It's the community. It's the what I called the civic virtue of private home education. The civic virtue, what de Tocqueville talked about as a civic organization, means private people coming together and carrying out the business of civic involvement. We don't need to wait for the government. We don't need to look to the government. We're citizens, and we're active and involved, and we should take it on ourselves to make our country better through our own little thing.
It is we the people, and we need to remember as homeschoolers, it is we the people, and y'all are defending us in the Constitution because it's we the people who are supposed to have the power in this country. And organizations all over the country, like you say, whether they're 10 members and they're learning about beekeeping, or state organizations like ours that monitor legislation, it's really powerful, and it sets us apart, I think, from anybody else in the world. And we need to keep building that, and we need to not let the government take control of our homeschooling through money or any other way.
Amen, sister.
Sorry. So reading your stuff always gets me really fired up. It's good for my internal passions and commitments. So, Jim, before we close, there's one more thing I want to talk about. We have the educational elite in the country that would like to outlaw homeschooling. So briefly tell us what happened with Harvard a year or so ago, and HSLDA's response to that.
Well, so it was actually, you said earlier, time flies, time does fly. It was actually 2020.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, it does fly.
So I remember this vividly, and I'll take a moment to tell you how it came about for me. So I flew out to Sacramento to speak at the homeschooling organization out there, their Capital Day in late February. And I was starting to hear about this thing called coronavirus, right? And I came back late February, and then I went to Missouri, Jefferson City, and spoke at their Capital Day. And in the airport, people were starting to be more alarmed about this thing called coronavirus. And I was like, oh no. And then I went to Austin from to Jefferson City to participate in a moot court for a Supreme Court case that was going to the Texas Supreme Court. And people were talking about it even more. And I'm flying back to Virginia, and it's like, oh my goodness. And through the airports, and there's just this big alarm. And then suddenly they canceled the NHL. And the whole world shut down. I mean, it just seemed to me like it happened that fast, right? And so we went to remote work for a little bit. I think it was during the Mike Pence 15 days to bend the curve or whatever that was.
Yeah.
And I was at home, and it was, I think, a Friday night, and I'm going upstairs to go to bed, and my youngest daughter, who was still being homeschooled at the time, meets me at the top of the stairs and thrusts her iPhone into my face and says, "Dad, have you seen this? You won't even believe it. Can you even believe this?" So what had happened was Elizabeth Bartholet.
So is that Abby the firecracker that showed that to you?
Yes, Abby the firecracker.
Okay.
Yeah, Abby is my youngest. She was born pretty sure she was in charge of the world. One of the family jokes is that when she turned 8 years old, Debbie was grateful that she finally had a child who could babysit all the others. Anyway, so Abby shows me this, and what had happened is, so Elizabeth Bartholet had written in this law review article that I had known about for months because it was published in draft form in, hard to find places that, lawyers look at, but nobody else did. But Harvard University Crimson Magazine had profiled Elizabeth Bartholet's opposition to homeschooling and her article in a very accessible, not law review fashion, in a typical profile. And the Harvard Magazine article went viral at the same time as coronavirus went viral. So here, this is the real irony of it. Her article became popular in which she proposes to a presumptive ban on homeschooling, which she called a presumptive ban, which meant that all but a tiny handful of people would be prohibited from homeschooling, just at the same time that everybody in the world had started homeschooling because the school shut down. I mean, they already had their kids at home, and homeschooling was a thing that people were thinking about. Well, anyway, so she made a lot of really, I think she sort of advances the tropes that homeschoolers have had to deal with for all these years. The kind of stigmatizing language about homeschoolers being backward clods and not trustworthy, and then she arrives at suggesting that only those people with very specific reasons, like actors or athletes, that need to not attend public schools. Everybody else should attend public schools. And that's okay because, parents will still have 2 or 3 hours in the night to train them in their religions and stuff like that, because and so in her view, homeschooling should be banned. Well, we were, obviously in disagreement with her, and we decided to write a series of essays that addressed different angles of her arguments. From our attorneys and others. I think we ended up with 17 different essays. We were releasing them kind of one every week. And one of our family members has a house on the Outer Banks in North Carolina. And since we were all working remote anyway, my family decamped to the Outer Banks. And the house So this was in May, I think, so shortly after the world shut down. The house was supposed to have good Wi-Fi, so I could work. I was thinking I just work from the house,
right,
and
not in the Outer Banks.
yeah. So no good Wi-Fi. So the house was actually on the northern part of the Outer Banks where there's no road and you have to drive on the beach.
Right.
With a four-wheel drive. So I was driving from the house into Corolla to a coffee shop that still had, it was still open and had Wi-Fi, editing these essays. So guys were email. What a crazy world! What a marvelous world we live in today. Because I could take my family to the Outer Banks during the midst of this coronavirus crisis. They were, but I could still work in the under the umbrella outside of the Outer Banks coffee shop with their Wi-Fi, editing these essays, and it was a great deal of fun for us to do, because each of our lawyers, many of them were homeschooled themselves, and so I think one of the early essays that came out was from Dan Beasley, who he's since left HSLDA to become a pastor at his church. He went into
but he was our South Carolina attorney for a while. Yeah. I love Dan. Yeah, just
an outstanding young man who grew up homeschooled his whole life, and his article was just a great article, a great deal of fun for me to edit, and then in the course of the next few weeks we put out these essays from each of our attorneys, giving their own perspective on why Professor Bartlett was just so wrong about homeschooling in general. And so that then we kind of assembled in a book, and you can get it at our website at hslda.org.
Yeah, I was going to tell you, it is on my short reading list. I still have not read that. I've got to read that. So tell me how I can order it, and tell everybody out there how they can order it. And they don't have to read all 17 essays, but just reading one will help people understand the necessary, why we need to understand freedom issues.
Yeah, so I think you just go to hslda.org and go to our store, and it's available there. And I believe, I probably shouldn't do this in the spirit of shameless commerce. I think you can actually just Google them, and because we were posting them on our website, so you don't actually have to buy the nicely designed book. You can just go to our website and find each of the individual essays. But if you order them, you'll have a very nice, attractive book to put on your shelf as well.
And what is the name of the book again?
I didn't bring it with me. It's Homeschool, Freedom, and Why It Matters.
Yeah, I think that's it. And we'll have it in our show notes today, so people can go to my website and find it if they want to do that. So one other thing I want to talk about, and you mentioned this in this article, in your article, I think it's so dangerous. I can't remember whether it was Robert Reich, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, or which of the educational elite it was. They've proposed multiple ways that families could prove their curriculum aligns with the empire's values and beliefs. And by empire, you meant educational elite.
Well,
and so I think one of the hills we have to be willing to die on as homeschoolers is the freedom to use any curriculum we want to. The first public hearing in South Carolina, it was on regulations promulgated by the State Department of Education that would require homeschoolers to have a college degree from an accredited university, which let out Harvard and Bob Jones University, and then only use state-approved texts. So we couldn't use any Christian curriculum according to this. And part of the danger, that one of the things, this is just a side note, that y'all do such a good job of protecting us from, is all these state agencies that can promulgate regulations that become legislation if they sit in a state registry for long enough, and nobody even knows it's coming. And so unless, the Lord just brought that to my attention through a neighbor who hated homeschooling and knocked on my door one night at 11 o'clock and said, "Zan, I hate homeschooling, but I love you. And so here's what the State Department of Education is trying to do under the cover of night." So nobody knows it happens until it becomes legislation. So that was all for free. But we got to be careful. And what do we do, Jim, to continue fighting this pressure to conform to the culture through our curriculum. I mean, to me, that's so egregious.
Yeah, well, so there's so many different levels of government involved in so many different ways, and so that's what we try to do is be a watchdog and monitor both legislation and administrative regulations. The battle over what we teach our children and how we go about teaching our children is kind of what it is all about.
Yes.
You mentioned administrative regulation. So we monitor, we do a significant amount of work monitoring regulations because most, people don't think about this a lot. State legislature in the federal government too, Congress, has delegated so much authority to, so much of their legislative authority in a way that I believe is, dangerous to administrative agencies
that aren't elected. They're not elected.
In many cases, they're not, and they're executive branch officials who are supposed to be carrying out the legislature's laws, but the legislatures have delegated so much authority to them to adopt regulations, and the regulations often are more egregious and more controlling than than what the legislature would have been able to pass, because they couldn't get elected or reelected if they were going to do that. But the unelected bureaucracy in the executive branch, promulgates regulations that they're a little harder to fight and they're a little more difficult to come against. So we monitor those as well. Yeah.
Well, that is so powerful. I tell you, I cannot imagine homeschooling without Homeschool Legal Defense Association. Well, I can, because I did it for 3 years and had the legal bills to prove it. But before I knew about HSLDA, but just the work to establish homeschool freedom along with state leaders, and always all these 1,400 superintendents you had to deal with last year in contacts, or however many school districts, and putting out the little fires before they become forest fires. I'm not sure we all appreciate the daily grind y'all go through in protecting homeschool freedom. And I just want to say thank you. I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
It's really our pleasure. We are homeschoolers too. It's very important to me that all of our legal team has a really strong connection to homeschooling. Over half of our lawyers, I think, right at half, were homeschooled themselves, and everyone else homeschooled
Isn't that
their children.
Amazing?
Yeah,
that's so amazing.
So we don't, this isn't just a job for us, and it's not just our profession, which we try to pursue with excellence, obviously, but it is our passion, it's our vocation, it's our calling. We want to serve and protect the homeschooling movement and community any way we can.
Well, Jim, tell people before we close. Tell them how they can get in touch with you or HSLDA about your podcast, and how to get in touch with HSLDA if they need help or just want to support the homeschool world.
Well, the easiest way is just to go to our homepage at hslda.org. And if you're not a member, but you want to start receiving our materials, you can sign up to get our weekly update by giving us your email address. The podcasts are announced each time they go out via email, and then they're posted also on our website and Facebook and Instagram and all those other things that people do things on.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here with me today. Please give Debbie my love. She's one of my favorite people. I admire her a lot. And thank you for being here, Jim. Congratulations on your new role as president, and we're all praying for you.
Well, thank you, Zan, and give Joe my best wishes on today as we film this or edit. What do? We video this. It's his birthday.
Yeah, how did you know that?
The dark secrets of birthdays of old people like us just can't be hidden forever.
That's amazing. He says on his birthday, Lincoln was assassinated and the Titanic sunk. And taxes are due the next day. So he'll appreciate some happy birthday wishes. So, well, thank you.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, Zan, as always.
Thank you for joining Jim and me today. I hope this was fun and encouraging for you on your homeschooling journey. Be sure to check out zantyler.com for show notes, details, and links mentioned in today's episode. Until next time, bye.